Okay, so I tried to record this video outside, but it's like 9 degrees out and my phone wouldn't hold a charge. So, what I'm going to talk about is the role that individualism and collectivism play in individuality, okay, in creating individuality. And the goal I'm going to set in this video, or the goal I'm trying to essentially achieve here, is to maximize individuality. Now, at first glance, you might think that the best way to maximize individuality is to maximize individualism, right? Because they're similar words, right? So they must line up with each other. But that's not actually true, okay? Individuality and individualism are not the same thing, okay? And I don't care who tells you they are. So to explain why they're actually two different concepts entirely, I'll define individualism and individuality. So individualism is essentially a belief or a striving for independence, right? You can think about individualism as independence. So let's say that you have a bunch of money in your bank account and you think that that money makes you financially independent of everybody else. That's not true at all, because the value of that money hinges on everybody else in that economy valuing that money, right? So if the currency collapses, all of a sudden you're no longer financially independent. And the same concept applies to any idea of independence, right? You might think that you are independent because you can grow your own food in your backyard, but who taught you how to grow that food? What kind of wisdom was handed down over generations in order to ultimately teach you how to grow food? What kind of how independent are you going to be when your neighbor no longer has food and they need to steal yours, right? The point is that individualism is essentially a lie. There is nobody who is independent, okay? And there's, by extension, there's no individualists out there. People might think they're individualists, but again, it's just a ruse. It doesn't actually exist. So when we talk about individuality, we can kind of define individuality as the expression of the individual, right? The expression of any person's uniqueness, right? So we all need like food, water, and shelter, but on top of that, we're all individuals, right? Some of us like rock music, some of us like rap music, some of us like cooking, some of us like I don't know, pottery, right? We all have these different quirks or these different hobbies that we enjoy, and that is individuality, right? And again, my goal in this video is to try to show you how we can maximize an individuality. And again, if we all pretend we're independent from each other, then in short order, we're going to, all of the things we depend on are going to break down and we're going to be at war with each other. So if we all pretend we're financially independent and all the money gets hoarded into the hands of a few billionaires, then all of a sudden there's not enough money for regular everyday people to purchase the necessities that they need to survive. So if we pretend we're independent like that, if we're all trying to be individualists, we create an environment with high competition that ultimately leads to war, right? Or civil war, perhaps. And civil war or war in general, is not a good environment for individuality to thrive, right? We can't very well write music or create new recipes for dinner if we are busy fighting each other, right? We're going to be more focused on surviving from the immediate threat that it might be outside our door. So again, by maximizing individualism, by pretending we're independent from each other, we're not going to be able to maximize individuality, okay? Far from it. So how does collectivism come into play? Well, collectivism enables us to work together to solve problems, right? It enables several people from different walks of life to come together and work to build a combine machine that replaces 200 men with shovels, right? So now we have this farm machine, this combine machine that is harvesting food at a rate we could have never done by hand. And because we had all those engineers come together and build this machine, we freed up 200 people with shovels to go explore their individuality, right? So the collectivism is essentially dependence, right? And it's interdependence, right? There's a mutual dependence implied in collectivism. So when I go to the store and buy something, I pay somebody's wage and I feed myself, right? And then I go and take that food, and that food feeds me and enables me to go and do whatever work I'm doing. Again, collectivism is kind of reality, right? We all depend on each other in ways that might not be obviously apparent to us, but rest assured, you are dependent on somebody. Especially when you think about it in economic terms, right? You're dependent on everybody else in that store valuing whatever currency you are paying for your food with. So, collectivism maximizes individuality. The more collectivism we have, the more we can work together to solve problems in an efficient manner, and by extension, free up time to again write music, to make recipes, to build things that we want to build, right? To whatever your individual self wants to do. So we have to think about how we can best implement that collectivism. And oftentimes people believe that the best way to do it is to create a government, right? And what that government does is it collects tax dollars, and then the tax dollars fund things that we need. This is called enforced collectivism, okay? Another way to describe that is socialism, okay? So when we enforce collectivism from the top down like this, what it essentially does is creates tyranny by the majority, all right? If you're speaking within a democratic framework. So if we elect a bunch of politicians this election cycle for the next 4 years, and these politicians implement socialist policies that collect tax dollars based on the desires of the majority who elected those politicians, again, that is just tyranny by the majority. Tyranny by the majority, even if it's enforcing collectivism, is not collectivism at all. It's just individualism. It is just a bunch of individuals using force to force other people to adopt their version of collectivism. So, again, what I'm saying here is that enforced collectivism, also known as socialism, is not collectivism at all. It's just individualism. It's just individualism that's dressed up to kind of fool you into believing that it's going to help maximize individuality. So what I'm saying here is that we don't want to enforce collectivism, right? We don't want to use a government to force people to do whatever the majority that elected that government wants to do. What we want to do is we want to choose voluntary collectivism, okay? And what that means, when you boil it down, is we just need to obey the golden rule. We just need to treat other people the way we want to be treated. And what this enables us to do is to not rely on tyranny by a majority to get the benefits of collectivism, right? What we want to do with that voluntary collectivism is essentially create a foundation of physiological needs, okay? Like I said, we all need food, water, and shelter, but we don't all need a Gibson guitar. We don't all need a nice sports car. I own a Gibson guitar, but I don't own a nice sports car because I don't care. I use cars to get from point A to point B. But some people want that nice sports car. Some people want to take that nice sports car out and race around a track because that is expressing their individuality. I don't want to keep that person from expressing their individuality because of enforced collectivism, because of socialism, right? So what we essentially want is almost like a socialist anarchy. We want people to treat each other well in order to create a foundation of physiological needs so that people can create art and so that people can do the things they want to do. Okay? And I think this is the best way to maximize the individuality. because tyranny by the majority is tyranny. Okay, I don't care if it's a 90% majority. You're still forcing that 10% to do what you want. So by following the golden rule, but by prioritizing the golden rule above the majority rule that is inherent to democracy, we maximize individuality and we maximize freedom too. Because if we all cling to the pure individualism, we're going to be at war with each other, and war is not freedom at all, right? War is tyranny by individuals, which is also terrible, right? So the individualist and the collectivist can learn from each other here. There's a lesson to be learned by both of them from the other. The person who tries to enforce collectivism can learn from the individualist. And what can they learn? They can learn that freedom is good, okay? Personal choice is good. In other words, it's not good to use tyranny by the majority to control the wannabe individualist. On the other hand, the individualist can learn from the person who is trying to enforce collectivism. And what they can learn is that collectivism is necessary. And not only is it necessary, it is the reality, okay? We all live in this world together. And if we're trying to control each other through some socialist means, then we're hindering freedom. But at the same time, if we try to all pretend we're independent from each other and we don't need each other, then we're just going to end up fighting, okay? In fact, I think we end up fighting either way. I think we end up fighting if we all pretend we're independent, and we end up fighting if we all pretend that enforcing collectivism works, because it doesn't. The cool thing today is that we have technology that can kind of replace the role of government. And the role of government, ideally, I think, would be to kind of connect communities that are operating in a collectivistic manner voluntarily, right? So if we have all of these communities around the country who are operating, voluntarily operating collectivistically, the role that government does is connect those communities, right? It literally collects tax dollars to build roads between those communities, roads and internet, right? But what the internet has done now is enabled us to kind of communicate and connect those communities across the country without the government, right? And I think that's the challenge that humanity is going to face in coming decades, is kind of releasing their attachment to the idea of government. We can still operate collectivistically or even socialistically without the government, but in order to do so, I think we have to understand that we have to do it voluntarily. We have to take personal responsibility to remain obedient to that golden rule. I'm gonna leave you with what kind of a summary. Okay, I think oftentimes when we're attached to the idea of democracy, and the democracy by definition is tyranny by the majority, or at least it can devolve into tyranny. It might not necessarily be tyranny, but it can devolve into tyranny. And oftentimes majorities get so the majorities shift from election to election, and that ultimately leads to tyranny by the minority, or at least to oligarchy, in other words. We don't want tyranny by the majority or tyranny by the minority. We want obedience to the golden rule. So we don't want majority rule or minority rule. We want the golden rule. Okay, so thanks for watching.